Okay, we're live. Over to you.
Cool. Thank you very much, and welcome to the next episode of Cool Story Bro. And today we're going to talk a little bit about meditation, which sounds so cliche after all right now, since it's been popularized by so many different traditions, and everyone is literally meditating or have tried to. And that's kind of how I felt about it before I found this technique, which is a very old Buddhist tradition called Vipassana. I think a lot of people know about this as well, because most people have a friend or two who's been to one of these very long retreats where you go into, you can't really call it solitude because there'll be a lot of other people, but you definitely go into silence and a space for yourself and for your thoughts and for removing all the mind chatter to really experience how it is just to be. And I can start a little bit with my own experience of that. I was introduced to it by a friend I met in Peru, and he talked good about it. And I thought, well, okay, I'll give it a try. I'll go into one of these retreats. I didn't really research much. I just knew that it was going to be meditation, 10 hours a day for 10 days, and it sounded all right. And then I went into it, and then I experienced after a few days how it was completely different than anything else I've ever tried. It was like I started getting very, very focused and very, very concentrated. And I felt like how my mind would start getting very, very specific, very clear, very laser focused. And wherever I would put my attention to, it was just getting magnified incredibly. And for the first 4 days of one of these retreats, you basically build up your concentration skills to be able to move into the insight period, which comes later in the retreat. But what happens also, which I find really interesting with this concentration period, is that when you start concentrating the mind, it starts unraveling some of all the old patterns and some of all the shit you walk around in every day and all the stuff you keep telling yourself. And it actually, after about 3 or 4 days, started giving hallucinations and really like vivid pictures from the subconscious. It was almost like watching, I wouldn't even call it 3D because it was just engulfed vision. So it was kind of like 360 degree, super ultra high definition vision of memories and patterns and a lot of things. And it just interested me a lot because I thought I was just going to sit there and meditate for 10 days, but then no one had really told me that it was this tool to experience different realities and to experience the subconscious and start working with all of that. They talk a little bit about that in the course, but I think they want to let it be up to everyone to experience it in their own way. And it's really, really powerful. I can almost relate it to doing really strong ayahuasca ceremonies, and that's just within the first 4 days of the retreat, and you build upon that, and it gets more and more strong towards the end of the retreat. But it's very interesting. I want to touch briefly, before I get too deep into some of the other stuff, a little bit about the history of this meditation and how the Buddha, or Gautama, the enlightened one, came across this technique, because he was like probably most of people know, he was a prince. He was born with everything he needed. He had all the riches, all the women, all the possibilities for a good life, in the sense that we know it in material life. And it wasn't enough for him. He felt like he needed something more, and he went on this search for many years. And he stayed with yogis, some of the best yogis he could find in India at the time, and he learned all these techniques and reached the 8th jhana, or the very high concentration state and bliss state called samadhi, where you literally just feel blissed out and everything is good. But it's still like it wasn't enough for him. He felt like there must be something more, because every time I get out of this state, there's still suffering. So basically what he was looking into was to remove suffering. And first of all, obviously within himself, because he could see the patterns of suffering, how something would arise and the mind would create this pattern with either aversion or craving. So the mind would never really be in this middle state. It would always try to find something that it didn't have at the exact moment, or try to avoid something that it did have at the exact moment. And that creates this kind of tension where you always bridge between being in an aversion to something or craving something, and you're never at ease. So he wanted to find out how you can detach from those two states and stay in the middle ground. And that's basically how he came up with or rediscovered the technique of Vipassana, which is seeing things as they really are, or experiencing the true nature of reality without the old dogma or the old sick patterns of the brain where it's never settling for something. And then he developed this technique by having, some of the first courses at the time were minimum of 45 days. Now they put it down to about 10 days because it has to fit with Western life and how we live our daily lives now. But at the beginning, or at the time of Buddha, it was 45 days immersion into this meditation technique. And I guess that would have taken you quite far at the time. But now down to 10 days, you start with the first 4 days of building up your concentration, start unraveling some of all the subconscious stuff that is playing around in your mind all the time. And then from there you move on to the insight, which is really the really interesting part, because the concentration part is nice. You can develop a lot of interesting skills. Like you have these cities that actually develop after a long time of deep concentration techniques. Like, we all heard about people who can not read thoughts, but control other people's thoughts a little bit. There's stories about yogis who can do that. And it's actually mapped out completely in this actually some of the old monks at the time started making which is actually what I want to talk about, which is I find the most interesting, is that they started mapping down the different experiences people would have, and it was completely quantifiable where people would get to after certain times of meditation and immersion into this technique. And some of all this information has been lost for a long time, and no one is really talking about it. But there's actually a complete map of different stages of awakening into enlightenment, or the Buddhist enlightenment, as they call it, which is the relieving of all suffering, which is the disconnection between the action and reaction in the brain that happens subconsciously. And I actually think I want to try to share my screen here to show you just a little bit. Let me just see where is the screen share button?
Press on the green share button.
Which one?
At the bottom. Yes. At the bottom, there's a share button, a green share button.
Share, yes, good.
And then screen
cool.
share.
Yeah, here it is. Let me know if you can see it.
Wow.
And this is actually just a small part of it. It's a very, very complex subject, but what I found very interesting was that I could actually, after finding this map, I could actually place myself on the map with different experiences that I had, like spiritual experiences, this experience of having the visions and seeing these things. And actually, when you start looking at this, everything is mapped in here, like has been talked about by the yogis. Like there's clairvoyance, clairaudience, telepathy. There's less need for sleep, more erotic dreams. It's all part of the subconscious unraveling, and then actually building upon. It's kind of like building a new pathways in the brain, where you start experiencing other parts of the brain that hasn't been experienced before. And the cool thing about this is that it's completely reproducible. So you can basically, you have different forums online where people they talk about this stuff and which levels they're at, and then by talking about it and comparing to others, they can kind of map into where they are in the map and figure out how far they are and how to get to the next level. And there's only one pitfall with that, and that is that it can become very goal-oriented, and that can have a bit of a exactly, that's a craving thing. So you're actually craving something more. You're craving the next step of enlightenment, or you're craving the next step of awareness, or the next level of concentration, so you can get more developed in one of your new skills, which is super exciting. And I actually, when I was there, I actually had an analogy for all the people who are gaming and trying to figure out games and get dopamine from that and go to the next level. This is actually the ultimate game. This is the game of life, the game of enlightenment, the game of awareness, the game of increasing your mind power. And there will be dopamine attached to it all the way along. And you'll have this, people now, they talk about hooking themselves up to these machines that vibrate so they can feel they're more part of the game. But this game is already vibrating. It's already firing your brain at the maximum levels. It's giving you bliss. It's giving you orgasm sensations. All these amazing things can be experienced within the body in just by closing your eyes and meditating and getting really deep into concentration and insight meditation. And I never knew about this. It kind of showed up through the different retreats I did and the experiences I had. And then I found this afterwards. Wow, there's people 2,500 years ago who mapped these experiences and tried to figure out how it worked, all in relation to unraveling the subconscious and how the mind expands upon all of these things. And the end goal in all of this is a piece of it's a state of mind where there's just peace, where we can see things arising like craving and things, but you don't have to react on it. So you're kind of severing the ties between action and reaction. And for me, having experienced just a tiny little bit of that, I'm nowhere near as advanced on any of these paths, but I've just experienced it, that there's truth in it. It's really true. You can quantify it and follow this map and see where you're at, and just start working on it. And you can then compare yourself or talk with other meditators who are doing the exact same thing, and then have some kind of this community around it where you keep developing yourself and building on yourself. And I just thought that was something very interesting to talk about, because I don't think a lot of people know about this. Most people, they use meditation like I did in the beginning for relaxation or lowering stress or better sleep and all these things, which are perfectly fine and a very good reason to use them. But here is actually mapped out a way to become a better person, to learn, if you want to be clairvoyant or clairaudient, learn telepathy. There's this increased faith. There's just this a lot of interesting things. And if you go back to the gaming analogy, it's kind of like the most interesting thing you could, in my world, like the most interesting thing you could ever explore is consciousness. It's like the whole universe put into your mind or into your body, and you can experience all of it just by meditating. And then someone on top of that actually made a map of it, so you know where to go. And when all these weird things starts happening, it could be like Kundalini effects, or there's something called the dark night of the soul, where everything just feels very depressive and just feels like you want to stop meditating and you don't want to go any further, and everything just feels like shit. And it's actually in the maps. It's supposed to be like that. It's part of the pathways of the brain to reach the next step, and you have to go through that to be able to develop the brain into the next step of the map. And but without the maps, who would know? You just think like you got crazy from meditating and stop. So I think it's super important to get this information out there for anyone who's done deep meditation or have tried to be in altered states of consciousness, and don't really know where to go from there, because there's not much talk about it. It's not like it's taboo, but it's almost like everyone thinks
it's myth, right? No one thinks
it's myth. Possible. Exactly. That's exactly what it is, myth. And I thought that for many years as well. And then suddenly I figure out, wow, there's people doing this, and they're quantifying it. They're talking about it openly on forums, and then they actually have a map to show where they at, not to compare themselves ego-wise to see, oh, I'm higher than you or something like this, but actually to learn from other people how to conquer the different stages of awakening, by helping each other and by having different techniques that you can share with each other. And I just find it super, super interesting.
And so who developed this map? Is it a Buddhist tradition thing? Is it developed to relate to Vipassana, or the different activities for sort of different parts of awareness?
It's definitely related to Vipassana. And it's probably some of the first monks who started doing it, who developed these maps, and then they've been kind of hidden in time for a long time, and no one used them. And I think the guy who made them famous again is this guy, Daniel Ingram, who's written a book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. And he has a very funny writing style, because he's very straightforward and he's very funny, and he's not like the super monk type guy. Like, he doesn't swear.
Serious Buddha.
Not the serious Buddha. He's more like the fun Buddha. And he's actually taking these maps and going through all of them and reaching some of the furthest states. I'm not sure he calls himself enlightened, but he's definitely treading the path and walk through many of these different stages of awakening, and can then explain them in his book how they are. And then he developed these visual maps, because most of this tradition was just in written down without visualization. So I think he was probably the one who started visualizing them and telling people how they can use them. So I just want to open it up with that, and then I'm really interested to hear what you have to say, or if you have any questions or your own experiences with meditation, or if you ever even knew that it was possible to even work in this way, like more, not schematically, because that would ruin a little bit of the experience, but more like, and I wouldn't call it goal setting either, because that's also a craving for reaching something you don't have at the moment, but it's kind of like just a way to see that you're on the right path.
Yeah, it's probably one of our favorite topics. That Rupert actually did a show a couple of weeks ago on how can you maximize consciousness. So we kind of talked about this idea of like how you're experiencing, consciousness, and what can you do to maximize it, and how it's linked to sensory perception. So like we have, 5 senses, and that's sort of what we think is it, right? And I think that's kind of just scratching the surface of all these other areas that can open up to you. Whether you believe in it or not, I think that you won't even develop or look into this much if you don't think that something's possible, right? If you just exclude it and say like an atheist, there's no religion, there's no God, then you're pretty much stuck with your 5 senses. And unless you have some major moment or awakening or something that forces that open, you won't really look too much into it. So I think that we're not really taught at all about that. Like, in Thailand, all the boys, I think, go and spend 1 year in a monastery or something, right? So something like that. So there's a lot of tradition in other cultures and countries where people are exposed to it because they consider it to be important. There's another culture where all the kids take some psychedelics, I'm not sure what type of drug it is, some plant medicine. And that's, again, just like a rite of passage. So they're made to see things that, otherwise we're in this today culture is illegal, like these drugs are banned or whatever. So I think people's eyes are kind of being kept shut in a lot of ways. And then because some of this stuff happened a long time ago, it becomes myth. And then you again start to question it, because we don't really have a very clear grasp on history, I would say, is also linked to that. It's like seeing examples of things to believe they're possible. It's kind of where it comes from. If you don't have any clear examples, and it is things that are stories and stories of thousands of years ago, and you have more immediate things in your life going on, then it's easy to kind of put it to the background. So I've kind of been exposed gradually to some of this stuff, like using psychedelics, using magic, being outside in nature, sun gazing. Like there's a lot of ways to sort of change sensory perception, and that again just gives you an awareness there's more going on than what you're normally seeing and perceiving, and that everything is kind of connected. I think that's also part of how people are able to tap into these sort of clairsentient senses, because everything is connected. So I think it's really finding the sort of practices that let you go deeper into that. And I haven't done Vipassana. Like my mom's done it, and I've had a few friends actually that have done it, like a 10-day one. And it sounds super interesting for me. Like, I don't know if I've got some resistance there, or just haven't got around to it, like having an online business, or plenty of excuses why not to do it. But I think it definitely is calling me at some point. But I did do like an isolation sort of recently where it was just me. So it's a bit similar and a bit different in other ways, but the idea of like kind of removing yourself from your normal environment. And so the sort of day-to-day stimulus, like the environment that really shapes and influences your habits, is kind of gone. And that's a big part of why I think Vipassana works so well, is you don't have the constant sort of reminders and reinforcements of traditional thought and traditional sort of habits, things you do normally, and the people around you that kind of trigger that. So I think that's probably one of the big benefits. But I'm curious, from your perspective, have you heard of like other people having the same experiences as you? Because it sounds, I'm not sure my mom ever told me about what you were saying about the sort of engulfed visions and things. I'm sure it's pretty different for everyone, but have you done other meditation before that you thought helped prepare you for the Vipassana, or made it more effective for you? Or do you think that sort of anyone can have something quite incredible like that, just starting out from zero, going to Vipassana?
I think I talked after the first, actually this was the first retreat that I had the most crazy experience and the most spiritual experiences about it. And then the other retreats I've done has been not so strong compared to that. And I talked with a few people at the retreat, and they had similar experiences. One guy was also he was just like almost like he was communicating with different beings and stuff at the retreat. And I don't think they don't talk much about this. And that's also one of the reasons why it has to be kept in silence, because if people start influencing each other during the retreat with different experience and stuff, it will not, it will affect their experience. But definitely there's a lot of these experiences, and that's also what's in the forum, where people, they share these experiences. Not they won't all be the same, but it's just interesting to see how you can fit them into the map and see, oh, that was this point. Oh, you just crossed this point, which they call the AAP event, which is a rising and passing event, where you actually experience how everything in reality is arising and passing. It's always ending, it's always opening. There's always change, and it's just it's just interesting how the mind is so complex, but still there's ways you can put it into a map and quantify it, and everyone can follow something, and they will all end up at the same experience. It will be different experiences, but there will be ways to talk about it and tell each other, oh, I had this experience, oh, that must be this part of the map, then okay, then this will be awaiting, how do I conquer that? So that's why I like talking about it like a game, because this is actually the game of life in my mind, because this is how you improve yourself. This is how you experience different realities. Yeah, there are other ways too, but this is the cheapest way that doesn't take any other tools than be able to find somewhere to sit down and close your eyes. And what's really cool about these meditation retreats as well is like you say, there's a possibility in the 21st century to remove yourself completely from society, have food served two times per day, have a bed ready, and have everything you need to be able to go deep into your mind. And it's basically like an operation where you're using your concentration power and your mind as a tool to operate inside your mind and remove obstacles that are in your way. And the way they put this up for people is like, it's free, it's donation based, and you can just go in and experience the true nature of reality. And if you don't want to pay for it afterward, there's no charge at all. You can just pay whatever you want. So having these possibilities in the 21st century is just absolutely incredible. And I think more people should talk about this, because just like you say, just getting removed from your electronic devices, just shutting off your phone for 10 days. Who has ever done that since 2009? I don't think anyone has done that. Not voluntarily, but going in there, you're cut off from everything, and the only thing you have to deal with is your own mind. And it's actually like a little bit like being a surgeon and seeing all this pus come up, and then you remove it with the laser cutter, and it's so interesting.
It's terrifying for some people. Like, I hear stories of them running out after 3, 4, 5 days, that they just can't handle their own mind, right? So it probably makes you confront things that you just like sitting in the back of your subconscious, whatever, not dealing with. So I'm curious, like, because other things can do that too, right? Like ayahuasca or other sort of things can show you things you normally ignore about yourself. So I'm wondering if there's a sort of other techniques that can help, either alongside it or like in preparation for it. And then this idea of enlightenment is that there are many ways. And so I guess if this was like a guaranteed textbook format where you just follow these steps and get enlightenment, obviously 10 days isn't enough for a lot of people, because I hear people coming back out after a year or 2 years. They're like, oh, I already missed that one, I want to go back and do another one. Like, so it's this process of like remembering and forgetting that we talk about. And it's like you go inside for a little while, you remember, then you come back out into the world and you forget again. And that sort of moment where it switches on, so you haven't forgotten what you take away. Like, how many have you done now, and where do you think it's going in that sense? Is it just a matter of just keep doing it every year or 2 years, or is there other techniques that you think kind of enhance that to help you integrate it once you come back out into the world?
Yeah, it's definitely a good question, because it's a lifetime process, and it's probably more than one lifetime. They talk about it in Buddhism as well. Like, you have karma, and the reason why Buddha was able to become enlightened was because he has all the good karma from the past lives, and that was why he was born as a prince. So he had everything in place, so he could actually remove himself and go seek enlightenment. And I've been doing it not once a year, but as often as I can. Obviously, it's a little harder now with family, and it's definitely exactly like you say. Like, you go in there 10 days, you remember what the whole thing is about, why we're here, what we're experiencing, how the mind works, how you experience all these states, and then you go back into everyday life. And if you don't keep your everyday practice morning and evening, you'll forget really fast. And I've come out with like super heightened awareness states and super high concentration, and then after 3 days I'm completely lost. Like, wow, what did I just do? It's like you completely forget everything. It's almost like different parts of your brains that gets activated, and as soon as they're shut down, you don't even remember what happened in those parts of the brain. And I think there's Moritz.
I think it sounds a bit like what happens with every single psychedelic technology, if you will, or psychotechnology, where if you reach high up very quickly, then you inevitably regress to the mean. You fall back down, because it's not really that you climbed up a ladder slowly and you then build like a new foundation on the lowest step, and then you build one more step and then next foundation. But you ran up the whole ladder, and then you wonder why you can't walk on the air. And so this is a very, very regular phenomenon, that people will have these heightened state of consciousness, or they have these incredible experiences, and then they struggle to integrate that into their life, and then re-enter life and either feel at home again in normal life, or to remember and recapture that feeling or that sensations that they had in this sort of heightened state. So for me, I've been thinking about that a lot, and again, it goes back to what we talked about last time as well, when I shared with sort of my agency and extended agency sort of theory or framing, that I think if you want to get very high up and stay high up, then you need to have the patience and the willingness to do the tedious, boring work of the day that gets you that small step further, and that cements that step. And so I think it's more capacity building, and it requires a whole sort of battery of habits that are assisting you in stabilizing the insights that you have into your subconscious and into your body at all as well, and then to build up from there. And so I, for example, have now developed a pretty good sense, like a very embodied sense of when I realize that there is something that I need to change about myself, like nutrition or habits, or I need to do something, I have this internal sense of, yes, that's something worthwhile to do. But if I now immediately switch to this thing, it will disrupt the stabilization processes of other things that are currently sort of wonky, and that I'm currently trying to stabilize. And so once those are then stable, then I can like turn my attention to the next thing and like add the next pylon, if you will. And so if you don't do it that way, you're constantly having this woo, oh, woo, oh, this like ride of joy and suffering. And it sometimes becomes addictive as well, because people are so caught up in sort of normal life that they then crave, as you said, the high from reaching those amazing states. And then it becomes just another thing they are consuming, rather than something they are integrating into their life, and that is actually fueling their growth forward. And this is something that Jamie Wheel talks about a lot, sort of the guy who wrote Stealing Fire and who is behind the Flow Genome Project. And he's been observing how all these psychedelic technologies are very quickly, he's actually pretty pessimistic at the moment, like not necessarily like terminally, but overall currently.
About himself or about society, you mean?
About society, or rather about the psychedelic community, because it seems to be assimilating the psychotechnologies like psilocybin, DMT, whatever it may be, whatever gets you up there, into a sort of super resistant ego, sort of like these super viruses or super flus that come back.
Antibiotic
harder.
resistance.
Exactly, because it is becoming an Instagram thing, like, oh, I just had this amazing experience, and what are you doing? You're sharing with other people, and it becomes a social thing rather than something for you. And so it becomes an ego boost thing. Oh, I had this amazing experience. And so you're immediately, once you come out of it, you make it something that gives you that social rush of like status. And so there's a whole battery of things that are required for these technologies or these tools to carry us up, and for us to then cement our progress and not fall prey again to the natural impulses that we have all the time of getting drawn back into the status game, the having mode, like I had an experience rather than I experienced something, this being thing. And because that being thing, that's much harder to achieve like on a stable level, because you actually have to do work, and people don't like to do work. And so they're just like, I'm just going to buy like my $5,000, $10,000 10-day retreat in Bali, and I'm going to go back, and like, then I'll be a new person. No, you'll just be like, you had some fun and you went back, and now you're back where you started, and maybe even worse off, because you realize how high up you can go, but your day-to-day life is actually so much worse compared to that.
Yeah, that's a big problem. It's actually interesting you say that, because what you're talking about, you actually have your own map of how it works for you. And in the Buddhist maps, there's also talk about this cycling back and forth, like cycling through these experiences, and you can cycle through them 1,000 times or 10,000 times. You get up there and you feel like, there's actually written in the maps like feelings of enlightenment, and that's how people feel. They feel so high, like, I'm enlightened now, man, what am I going to do? And then 10 days after or 5 days after, they feel like shit again. And I've had the exact same experiences, so I know exactly how it is. And it's a pitfall, but the good thing about it is, when I experienced it, that there's other people having the same experiences, and it's in the maps.
It's also part of the experience too. Like yeah. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like saying that people need to be the perfect like warriors of enlightenment that know when to like do things and when not. Like people have to be able to make mistakes, but that's a trap at least that you can fall into.
Yeah, and there's actually it's part of the maps that you have to cycle through all this stuff, and you have to put more attention, more concentration. And at one point, when you're done all your deeds, or when the mind has cycled through all enough of experience through those cycles, then you'll be ready for the next step. And that's actually what most people are then craving, which would be a bad thing then. But there's one little part which is like the new platform, which is called stream entry. And some people do it in the first retreat, some people do it after 10 retreats, some people do it after 10 years. It depends on the karma probably you have, or the experience you have, or how much you're able to concentrate and deal with all the stuff that comes up into your mind. But that is more like a platform where everything else below that has stabilized, and that will be your new level of awareness. So every time you then start the next cycles, they'll be starting from there. So that's really interesting. All the other stuff cycling around there, that's kind of like the lower consciousness, the heavy stuff. And then while you're fine-tuning your awareness to be able to perceive finer and finer and finer vibrations in the body while you're doing your meditation, then you also reach different levels. And then there's this level that's kind of like cemented platform, where as soon as you reach that level, you can't go back. So that's like the point of no return. From there on, it's written in the maps as well, from there on you'll know, okay, enlightenment is possible. First of all, like this knowing of, okay, I'm on the path. Like they also call it first path, actually, because it's like they even call it like the first step of awakening. So everything you've done before that, even all the experiences, everything, it's nothing compared to now the next step where you're starting from there. And that's just the beginning. Then there's all these other levels. So everything we are cycling through and all that stuff where it feels like, oh, I'm enlightened. I know I wasn't enlightened the next day. It's part of the process. But the problem is no one talks about this. No one teaches you that, oh, it's okay to feel enlightened one day and then the next day you feel like shit. But people think there's something wrong with them because they don't know that it's part of the cycles of the brain to be able to experience that and go down. It's like raising up and falling again, like raising up and falling. It's the same like starting businesses. Like the more times you fail, the better your next idea will be, or the better the next business will be. It's the same with this. Yeah, so I can definitely relate.
Yeah, I want to say one more thing. Like the sort of train of thought that I've been developing with the sort of capacity building, gradual thing, whatever, like it has come a lot out of my reading of a particular book called Operative Traditions by Miguel Angel Fernandez. And I think bringing up sort of the concept of constraints is important. Like new capacity emerges within constraints. And so this is why people always talk about the ascetic path as being sort of one of the paths to enlightenment, or perhaps even the only one, like where you deny yourself pleasures, you force yourself into certain strict schedules, you don't act on impulses, all these things that are constraints. And these constraints force you to have a certain regularity. And in that regularity, you're basically setting boundaries to your impulses, your actions, your desires. And by keeping those stable, you sort of have a space in which things can sort of do this primordial chaotic sloshing around. And then in that process, but because it doesn't go beyond those boundaries, you have a buildup of energy and a buildup of sort of raw potential that then quite naturally actually leads to sort of this alchemic process, if you will, of transforming coal into gold, or whatever it is, like whatever metaphor you want to use, where because you're sort of boxing it in and you're putting in energy from the outside, there's no other way for this to evolve other than to get to a higher state of order. And this is true on the very physical level and with your body. Like, this is why training regimens are so important, that you have physical challenges as well, and sort of physical discipline, and not just the sort of mental discipline. And so, yeah, I think the idea, the concept of constraints is really important. And if you are constantly or quite frequently like sort of jumping around from this thing, then to that thing, then to this thing, and then to that thing again, and then back here, you're never actually making progress, like with all of the parts of you integrated into a full being in a sense and on a path, because you're just constantly chasing the next high, the next thing, the next distraction that pulls you away, rather than being another thing that adds to your path. And so this is, I think, where you can add a component to Vipassana, perhaps as sort of a bit of scaffolding, if you will, sort of some structure that allows you to prepare yourself up a bit until the experience, and then to take some of that back into your normal life. And that is, I think, some form of journaling, or some form of writing, or some form of you externalizing your thoughts, which is basically also a sort of meditation, because you're instead of just letting the thoughts pass by, you're sort of plucking them out and putting them somewhere else, and you're continuously doing that. And actually, I think that I've experienced the past 2 months of pretty constant flow state because I've been now practicing this for quite a long time. And so whenever I notice a thought that is sort of in my awareness that I can't act on immediately, I immediately take it and I put it somewhere else, like either in my book, or in my Evernote, or in my task manager, whatever it may be, or into an email, or on Facebook, or whatever. And so I have this light head, if you will, of being able to focus my energy, my awareness, and my attention and my intention specifically always on something that I can do, rather than something that I need to sort of think about. And so then all of the thinking that I do either is an active kind of thinking, where I take some time and I write something down, or I arrange something spatially with pen and paper, or I do it on some mind map or whatever, or it is a subconscious, unaware processing in the back of my mind. And I will frequently now, basically every single week, I have many different threads of sort of conversation or thought that are between me and different people that I work with, or that I am friends with, or whatever. And I will have something that they say, and I know it's important. I need to maybe do something with that. And they have the sensation, oh, it needs to be immediate. We need to do this. And then they want me to produce something for them to get to the next step. But then I will just sort of let it be. I will just let it be in the back of my mind, or in my task manager, or wherever. And then I just do my other things. And then naturally it comes back to me. And suddenly this fully formed idea pops into my head, or I realize, oh, this thing that I did 3 years ago, I should take that, apply it here, and boom, you have the thing. Or I should not actually do that myself. I should connect them to this other person, or I should bring somebody in to help us. And so these kind of things come along, not because I'm racking my brain about how to do something, but because I'm giving it the space to figure it out on its own. And I'm consistently practicing. And this is the really important part. Practice, constant discipline in going through your process, which then adds sort of to your craft. And I think this is another thing that people need to realize, that meditation is not sort of a hobby, and it's not really something that is a one-off experience. Well, at least you don't get really the benefits from it, but it's a practice. And so it requires consistency of some sort. And of course, you can dial up the frequency or the intensity as your life allows you, but there should be some constancy to it, even if you have interruptions at some particular points because life gets in the way. And so this this understanding of your life not as a disconnected series of events that are happening to you, or sort of things pulling you apart or away from where you're going. The sort of journaling not only allows you to put your thoughts out of your brain and onto paper, but also actually to do sort of self-programming in a sense. Like, I'm basically rewriting my source code every time that I journal, or that I like take a note that is very central to my life and like change it up or whatever. And in that way, you have a much more hands-on approach with dealing with things in your life, rather than sort of wanting to get to the calmness state of mind. Like, there are two portions of this. One is the needing calmness, and that's why you meditate. The other is doing something about your fucking issues rather than sort of avoiding them by meditating. And you need both of those.
Yeah, it sounds like you got a good technique for sort of mental chatter, or just keeping the mind sort of calm. And I think that's why a lot of people do meditation, obviously, is because their just mind is so chatty and so noisy. And even now, if you try and just think about nothing for 60 seconds, or think about your breath or something, and see how many thoughts just come and go, that's just the process of meditation, right? It's not trying to stop the thoughts. It's just being aware of those thoughts are just coming and just going, and not just getting attached to that loop, or, following that down. So I think it's interesting about the preparation, like before and after these kind of things, and then the daily consistency that kind of gives you that foundation, like that capacity to handle these events and then integrate them. Like I felt the same thing doing magic mushrooms, is that you were kind of able to see beliefs in a way that you were able to sort of pull out subconscious programs, like a Windows control panel. You can uninstall old software and reinstall new belief systems, almost being able to do that effortlessly in that state. And then it does carry over somewhat after that experience, because you had some sort of insight into a way of maybe thinking that was imbalanced, or was giving you some suffering or some pain, and then you were able to kind of really dial into that with enough awareness that you could hold that aha moment afterwards, right? So it didn't just escape. Like a lot of things when you go into psychedelics, it's like they're very hard to verbalize or bring back from that experience, and it's very hard to integrate them. That's one of the trickiest parts almost, because you're just experiencing consciousness in a way that's unfathomable for your normal senses. So you come back and you're like, I get all these insights, I want to write them down, but I'm just off in my little trip, and then I'll come back hours later, I'm like, damn, there's so much gold there, and I'm only putting back little tiny bits. And it's very much how it is, right? If that's what you can verbalize, then obviously how much can you then integrate afterwards? So I think having that kind of daily foundation or consistency mentally, like what you talked about, is super helpful. And then also physically, because that's another point I want to touch on, enlightenment, and Ollie's been talking about that in the chat as well. Like, people talk about enlightenment, but without really addressing the physical body, I think there's a big disconnect there. And so part of the reason we're always stuck in our mind is because our energy is always stuck in our mind, and so the energy is not balanced there. And you need to have energy flowing through the whole body. You need to have that integration with the physical, with your physical body and your physical self. And there's just so many things in our modern world that aren't set up for that, right? We're totally conditioned left brain. We spend all our world intellectually working in abstract, concepts and on laptops and online and stuff, and very little of it is now like physical mastery. So this is why we have a lot of disease today, because people just aren't connected to their bodies. They're not able to get feedback from them early enough to see disease or sense, some unease. And so it has to get really bad, like some cancer diagnosis or something, before you start to take it seriously and understand, okay, what's going on in the body. So I think physical mastery is a huge part of enlightenment. I don't know if we want to touch on that now, or you had another point you wanted to mention first.
Yeah, I just want to add sort of another metaphor here to really bring home the point to people. Like, if you're a couch potato, you don't just run a 40K marathon straight from your couch. Like, you go take a walk first, and you get comfortable with like walking around the block perhaps, and then you start to add more laps to the walk, and then like maybe you start to go into a club or whatever. And this is another thing that people also forget. Like, it's a social thing as well. You don't have to do all of this by yourself. It helps to have people who are both a couple steps in front of you and a couple steps behind you, around you, so that you are not only learning through sort of your own undirected self-teaching, but rather have some guide that can at least point you like where you will likely find the next treasure. And this is the other thing that people forget all the time, which is also something that we're still struggling with because it was so in school. You need to teach. You need not only to learn, but you also need to teach. You need to bring what you're learning to other people, because that cements in you your understanding of yourself as somebody who is not only consuming and sort of taking and being given, but who also is giving again away. And for me, the most gratifying part of my work, not only in sort of the tech and the education and the entrepreneurship, that kind of stuff, but also just in general, like being a big brother to my younger brothers, or being a friend to my friends, is in giving them opportunities, giving them new insights, helping them realize something they've been struggling with for a long time. And so there are sort of many of these components that are left out of the conversation for like on the path to enlightenment, because people come in contact with this for the first time in some sort of media forum, be it like Instagram or whatever, somebody posting, oh, I just did this like amazing retreat or whatever. And then the reason why they get into it is because it looks so amazing and because the people seem so amazing. But then you need to sort of go through a process of burning that kind of initial exposure point to it from your soul, and instead like connect that interest to something much deeper, something that actually is connected to where you want to go in your life and what kind of people you want to have around you and how you want to live and all of those things. So it's again, I don't like the word sometimes because being overused, so this holistic approach, but like you put everything in your life in relationship to everything else, rather than having something that is over here that's completely disconnected from what's over here. And doesn't mean that you have to get good at everything at the same time, again, gradual progress, but that you keep some awareness of where your construction sites are, if you will, and to not get super far in one without any work on others, because then it's not a stable foundation and you will fall down again when the next inevitable sort of momentary stress factor comes into your life and you can't keep up what you haven't really stabilized.
Yeah, it's difficult to have that awareness of like building foundations in all those different areas. Like it's easy to kind of get imbalanced but just focusing on one area. For example, like some people just focus on their bodies and they build these amazing bodies, but they have very undeveloped brains, right? And then you have the opposite, nerds sitting down all day programming or something and they have amazing intellect, but they have no, not worked in their bodies. So I think that
it starts in school again. Like it starts in school again, where like we have, especially American culture has exported this stereotype all over the world. It's not actually that extreme in most places that I believe. Like just American college or sort of high school is this place where the jock, the cheerleader, the nerd, all these sort of terms are first defined and cemented and made into stable identities that people then identify with, and that then prevents them from seeing themselves as a unique person, as somebody who is at least valuable enough to themselves that they can invest into all parts of their life, rather than just this, oh, they made me the nerd, now I need to prove them that I am the smartest, or I need to just all jocks are stupid and so I don't want to develop my physical side. And so I think one of the beautiful things that I'm seeing happening at the moment is that we're seeing the rise of an emergence of sort of a whole sort of slew of new kinds of male leaders on the internet, who are not only talking about fitness, or not only talking about spiritual enlightenment, or not only talking about career, but they are bringing all of these things together, and that are offering men a broader and at the same time a broad and a deep approach to living a good life.
Yeah, is there any that you can recommend off the top of your head that you think are giving like good information or good advice out there, or is it in your personal network, or is it more like public figures?
Well, I'll be going to Grounding Camp by Elliot Haltz in the summer in June, and he's been on YouTube forever, pretty much, like I think 10 years or so, even more. And he started out as a strongman, like developing very much his physical.
He was a proper meathead for a while, wasn't he? And now he's getting
totally, like
other things.
Total bozo, basically. Like, and if you look at some of his older pictures, it's like this completely beefed up guy, like with a bit of a sort of, I won't be mean, but like so a bit of stupidity in the eyes. Like just so much energy, but no direction in terms of or intelligent application of that energy. And so he ran into different issues with that. But I do kind of like him because he always goes full charge ahead, and then like runs into this massive issue and then is forced to level up some other part. And so it's quite actually beautiful to watch sometimes. And like now he's at this point where he has, like, I think the past 4 years he wasn't on YouTube. Like he decided to basically quit YouTube for a while and like completely focus away from sort of the audience that had been following him religiously in the millions since then, and instead focus on rebuilding his marriage a bit, rebuilding his masculinity, recovering from injuries, and just escalating the spiritual side in a sense. And now he's becoming sort of somebody who's also a proponent of family formation and like sort of sensible approaches to sex, for example. All these different things that are somehow get you back to sort of conservatism, if you will, sort of typical normative approaches, but from a much deeper understanding why those are relevant and important and can be beneficial to your life, rather than sort of this inherited anti-attitude against anything that's new or different or stimulating.
Yeah, I haven't followed him recently because I guess he's not been on YouTube much, but I remember back in the day, just for like bodybuilding tips or strength tips.
He's been coming back now, yes.
Yeah, that's interesting to follow. Yeah, I think that like when we bring this back to meditation, it's, you're trying to basically maybe come away from your normal way of looking at things. And so it's like we are conditioned, a lot of our life is on a sort of autopilot or automatic, and we don't question a lot of our ways of thinking and our assumptions. Like we just do the best we can do with what we were given, right? So in school, from your parents, there's a lot of that part is passed down, and then you go through certain experiences in life that make you question those things, or you come across someone who inspires you to think differently. Like I had quite a powerful experience with this guy called John DeMartini, and he talks about this principle of like mastery or life mastery in different areas. So it's very similar to kind of what we're talking about. And I didn't think about it as meditation at the time, but then when you're really thinking about it, like again, there's the Taoists have this thing of, you have meditation, you have contemplation. So there's like two different philosophies almost of like enlightenment, if you like. And meditation is the thing about getting really quiet, maybe trying to not stop the mind or slow the thoughts, but like just trying to calm that down a little bit. And then contemplation is very much like introspection, but you're really like going through these belief systems you have, why you think things a certain way. And I really am much more attached to that actually than meditation when I talk about those two sort of opposites, if you like, or just different ways of doing it. So I think contemplation is another really interesting philosophy that's just, again, completely lost today. No one really highlights that. But maybe it's come back more and more. Like people like John DeMartini, they kind of say, you can rate where you think you are on those different areas of life, and then okay, you can be really good at one thing or two things, but you neglect the other thing. And I see that a lot of times. People, they're really good in career or business or money, and they neglect their health or their relationship with their family. Like, this is classic, right? So you can use meditation to get awareness of those areas maybe that you're normally ignoring or not thinking about or not valuing, and then you realize how that's kind of hurting you because you're just not having that balance, or something's missing in that sense. You can keep chasing, be really good at money, and still not find that overall like lift or a boost in happiness and wellness. So like in terms of practical tips for that, like I think John DeMartini has a really good system for just understanding those areas of life and thinking about it from that perspective. It's just like a game, like Emil was saying, the game of life. And so you have, career, business, wealth, family, health. And I think that the one that I've been most focused on is just like health and wellness to start with. After business and you have enough money that you're not going to worry about your immediate needs, then for me, health is the much more immediate one, because what I was saying about preparing the physical body and the enlightenment, how it relates to physical body, if you don't have that physical capacity, a lot of these things are not open to you. Just for example, sun gazing is quite esoteric. I mean, I wouldn't suggest everyone jump out and do that, but you need to have a pretty strong physical body to be able to handle the stress from the sun. So being able to be outside a lot in the sun versus normally we're all indoors, we don't have that capacity anymore. We've lost that, right? So we're kind of denatured, but you can get a lot of wisdom just from being in sunlight, and there's a lot of intelligence there. Same with like the plant or mushroom intelligence. There's like really powerful information there, but it's just beyond most people's ability because you might be vomiting or nauseous, or like your physical body isn't able to handle that. I mean, in some level, there is like a poison or a toxin there. So you have to kind of condition your body and have a strong foundation that when you're taking these things, your nervous system is strong enough, your physical body is strong enough. So I think that not enough attention is given there. And like you say, people try and jump and have these amazing highs, like doing ecstasy on the weekend or doing some amazing thing that takes you out of yourself completely. And you get this momentary like, wow, like love and, everything is one and connected to everyone, hugging strangers and stuff. And then you go back to Monday and, you're feeling pretty miserable again. So it's a way to kind of make that foundation stronger, so that when you go as high, you don't come back down as the same, and you have that thing you hold on to afterwards. You're like, yeah, I took something away from that. So every time that I finish a trip, like I do some sort of self reflection and journaling and try and understand, what did I encounter? I'm just trying to process basically what happened. And then once I've done that, like you said, I find it easier to kind of share it, not really teaching necessarily, but like sharing it in a way that it really forces me to reflect on what did I learn and what did I take away. And so I often share on Facebook something, some takeaways or some things that I experienced, just to give other people a glimpse of also what's possible out there. But it helps me kind of really integrate that. And then it's there, and then it triggers often other thoughts like days or weeks later, just because I spent time, and that's contemplation. So I call that contemplation, right? And for me, that's really powerful. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
I really like that you bring in contemplation, because it is another one of the dimensions of practice that John Vervaeke also talks about in his Meaning Crisis. Like, he talks about how he practices not only meditation, not only contemplation, but also then a physical sort of movement discipline of some sort. And so it's those three that are in combination a pretty well-rounded trio of practices that mutually support each other and allow you to like calm your mind, go deep if you want to, sort of into your social or language brain, if you will, and to then deal with the energy flow in your body in a productive manner, rather than sort of just this spontaneous emergence or sort of momentary high. And then that allows you to have these things that are mutually supporting and that are sort of mutually amending the practice in each other. Like, I found it, I very naturally started moving now, like on not only like deliberately in like specific practice sessions, but just all the time in the day. And I suddenly burst out into song, and then I'll whistle, or like I'll suddenly dance a bit on the street and like play a little bit with like people wondering what I'm doing, because I'm doing something strange that they're not expecting. And it's just these little plays that you're making in both the social and non-social world, where you find it joyful and meaningful to play with your own sensation of what is a worthwhile thing to do. And for me, for example, it even takes the form of like meeting strangers and figuring out how I can, in the shortest amount of time possible, establish some kind of meaningful connection. And that kind of joyful approach actually to meditation thing anymore, something that you do sort of or self-disciplining way, but it's both of those things. Like you need both of those poles to keep you away from, like, basically what happens is when you get better at this stuff, you start to feel much more energy, and you won't necessarily know where to put it. And some people put it immediately, they become sex gods, or they become business masters, or whatever. Like, they apply this energy to some part of their life and they get good at it really quickly. And then this opens up all kinds of new doors, new opportunities. New people might want to sleep with them or make business with them, or like they just want to bring them stuff. And so they suddenly have to have this onrush of opportunities and of new enticements, new desires, new rushes of endorphins and dopamine. And it's a challenge then to not fall prey to, let me just jump on this thing and like have a threesome here and just go wild, which is fine as well. But like, people can then again get lost, because then they stop doing the practice, because these things are so very enticing.
Yeah, it's like grounding yourself in what got you there and not losing that. Like I'm sure we all kind of encounter that, like we reach a lot of success, we get carried away, and we kind of forget, okay, there's that grounding that needs to be done to maintain that sort of baseline, that wellness. And if you just get carried away, like depleting your energy, eventually it's going to come back and get you in some form. Yeah.
Right.
That's actually also one of the pitfalls in many of the old traditions, that when you reach these supernatural powers where you can start manipulating energy and getting people to do what you want, and that happens to a lot of gurus as well, they get lost and they kind of forget what the path was, and then they just get lost in this orgy thing or whatever, because they can do it, or they, like you say, They have women do whatever they want, lick their feet, or these kind of obscure things, because they can do it. They realize that they has these immense power, the immense energy, and the ability to manipulate it, and then they abuse it because they haven't developed the mental capacity to be able to have those powers without getting corrupted. Yeah.
They lose respect for, I think, the divine spark in every person around them. Like it's sort of, once you see how easy it becomes to actually be the most authoritative person in a room, like without effort, then you have this danger of feeling like, oh, like maybe these people aren't actually worth much, and I should just be like using these powers to make them do things that are better for them because I know better.
Yeah.
And then you start
putting yourself on a pedestal.
And you start to assert your own agency over and above and through boundaries of other people. And so for me, I think the thing that you need to keep in mind when you do that is like it is even more joyful, I think, and even more exciting and even more fulfilling and gratifying if you can figure out how to play well with others and lift them up with you, and sort of redirect the energy that you're getting from doing all this great stuff towards them, and sort of engage in this energetic interchange where as soon as you get a rush of energy, rather than sort of sublimating it into yourself and like using it for some new immediate outburst of energy, you redirect it to other people. Like you let the opportunities that are coming towards you flow towards other people that are in your area of concern. And that way you build up the capacity around you, not only within you.
I think that's easy to do when you stop seeing yourself as separate as well from others. Like as you get more connected into nature, I find, and that's my meditation, whatever you want to call it, that you kind of see that connection to almost everything and living things in nature, but also other people around you. And so you almost want to help them because you're helping yourself. And then it's not even like hard to do or something like that. You know, it's not like you're giving up something to do it, which I think people struggle with charity, or this idea of, giving up some of your time. If you don't, again, it probably comes back to abundance and scarcity, which I probably want to do another show on. But if you feel abundance and you feel like a lot is coming to you, you don't mind giving a piece of that or sharing a piece of that to lift someone else up or to help someone else, because at the end of the day, a lot of it is just awareness, or just it is experiential. Like I like to bring people out here or in nature and have that moment as well. And some of it you can't always share with words, but whatever form you do, share that energy and that love. If you're not seeing yourself always as separate or the self, then you're not always comparing and you're not always trying to just hoard and accumulate. And I think that's what a lot of our society is kind of trained to do. It's just like this endless hoarding of whatever surplus you get, whether that's monetary or energy, and being able to kind of share that from a place where you're not worried about running out of it, because you know how to get more of it, because it's just that abundant. Right. It's just that, it's everywhere. So
I'm always concerned that, like, I've never wanted to be in the center of attention. Like I've always wanted to be the guy that supports the guy who's in the center of attention, because I've never felt like I was able to handle all that attention or even all that responsibility, because I feel if you're in that place, people very easily idolize you or reify you. And like I'm noticing this right now, because like I've been on this like 2-month flow state, and through that I'm now radically increasing my capacity of doing projects. Like I'm starting to get asked to do negotiations for companies, to like create podcasts, to like do all these different things that are suddenly coming to me, and I'm not necessarily saying no or like rejecting them, but I'm trying to figure out a way that I can help them do what they need to do without me doing it. Like with them, like connecting them with somebody I know, or telling them, hey, first look at this and you need to get this clear first before you make the next step, those kind of things, and sort of turn the thing around again and then bring it to the people who came to you or who you are already connected with. Because and I'm noticing that I'm getting increasingly more comfortable with being in more of the center of attention, if you will, but I definitely don't want to lose that sort of, not exactly distrust, but sort of this giving room to the possibility that I'm missing something.
You don't have the complete picture.
There you go. Okay, yeah, exactly. Like that. As soon as you say you have the complete picture, it's over, because then
you're your downfall.
Yes, and so and it's very difficult to do when people are coming at you constantly and saying how great you are and like how you have figured it all out and how you need to like bring this to everybody. And I'm like, no, hold on. Like, I'll be sharing what I'm doing, and I'll be trying to increase you guys' capacity as well. But don't think that I figured it all out, and don't think that it's come like with no cost, or that I'm just a genius, or like whatever. It's very, very tenuous, and you have to be very careful with it.
I think it's a human trait almost to like make people a guru and expert, and then we're so conditioned to just outsource or delegate everything to an expert. And so what does the expert think? Oh, I'm going to go follow the expert, right? And totally missing the context of like everyone has blind spots, everyone has their bias, everyone has their own conditioning, and everyone's unique as well. So like what works for my physiology won't work for yours necessarily. And so that process to rush to a guru and to try and like shortcut that learning process, it's very tempting because you just think that's the fast way to like getting to success or whatever it is, that destination. You think that guy's got it and you want it, and so you're just gonna copy and paste exactly. And like you can model some things, but the modeling of like daily consistency and practice that gets you there, like you can't copy and paste that. That's something you have to integrate for yourself. Yeah.
Right, and you need to make the knowledge and the practice your own. It can't be something that you're just mirroring and imitating. It has to be connected to the sort of transcendent thing within you, because then, well, not only that, you also, and I think this is an area where the East can learn from the West, which is where the West and sort of Christianity and Western civilization, if you will, has always sort of made this truth thing very high, like logos, like this idea of articulated speech being like the highest value in our society. And it is basically something where if you get increasingly good at noticing when you yourself are saying things that you know to be false, to stop yourself and to like readjust and to sort of dial down the scope of your claims. Like if I would say like, I know how to build a business, that's too general. Like that isn't true. I don't. Like, I know what I have done in the context of all these experiences that I've had and the mentors that I've had and the friends that I'm working with, and like where things are going currently in this day and age. Like all of these are contingencies and sort of context. And it's if you become a master in revealing both to yourself and to people around you the context in which something emerges, and you are extremely precise and articulate in your speech in identifying what you currently believe to be a factor in some relationship or some development, but not the exclusive driver of it. You need to leave that transcendent room there in a sense. You can't say this is the only way that it's happening. Then it becomes increasingly easy over time and very quickly, because you're not running into issues faster than you can solve them, because you're not saying this is the way and then you trust this completely and then you run with that full frontal, and then suddenly the wall comes because you forgot that there's something you missed. And so for me, the superpower sort of is that I feel like that I think people can develop if they are good at, if they are willing to do it, is to get really, really good at speaking extremely precisely, and to not speak when you can't speak, when you can't actually make a pronouncement on something.
That's really tough. Yeah, I struggle with that one. So I definitely agree that's a skill to be practiced. And the other point,
into it and out of it, of course. Like it is also playful, but like we're on the serious things, I think.
Yeah. I mean, or just a caveat, always, I don't have the complete picture. So this is just my opinion of what I have experienced based on my process, right? And I think that I'll hand it to Emil because he wanted to say something. But the issue is when you want to like sell something or you're offering a service or product, then it's like people expect you to have the complete picture. So if people struggle to like buy something unless they think you have the answer, right? And then it's like there's some part of you that wants to make it out as if, yes, you have figured it all out because that's what you're expected to be as the expert or guru. So we need to get away from this whole model. And I think trying to bring this back to meditation, how it's kind of relevant, like if you really spend a lot of time meditating, you realize like there's so much out there. How can any one person have that complete picture, right? But if you don't really investigate that too much, maybe you just assume that, you know, other people already are experts and gurus, and for some magical reason they got there, and you can just kind of copy and paste. But I think when you meditate, you realize there's just so many levels. No one can really ever have the complete picture. So even now, when I buy someone's product or service, or I do a health consultation with someone, I'm not expecting them to know even more than me necessarily. They may just have some, you know, some gold nugget there that I need that's going to help me on my journey, but I'm not expecting them, or I'm not going to subordinate everything to them. I'm going to question them. I'm going to criticize everything if I find issues with it, but I'm still going to value their opinion because of, you know, they've obviously got some learning of their own unique background. But it's just trying to like not make yourself the student or the guru, but like somewhere in the middle where you just are on your journey and you've learned certain things you can pass on. And then when you seek out an expert or someone who has some knowledge, you're not subordinating to them, and you're being still critical. So you're not just accepting blindly, but like you make it your own. Like you take what's useful and you integrate it and you discard the rest. And I think that's a really useful part of this journey, right?
It's really interesting that you brought it up, because it's actually one of the 5 Buddhist precepts that you have to follow to even be able to meditate correctly, which is you need to tell the truth. You can't lie. And that also means not exaggerating like a lot of people do unconsciously, because they want to make the point stronger or they want to do something, and they're actually lying a little bit. And some of the other precepts are obviously you're not allowed to kill, you're not allowed to drink alcohol, you're not allowed to have sexual misconduct, and all of these things maybe doesn't make a lot of sense for people who don't really know so much about meditation. But if you really get into the meditation, you see very clearly, if you do any of these things, your meditation will suck, because you are spending so much energy like trying to solve something about your sexual life that you shouldn't do, or you're drinking too much alcohol, so you're not able to get the concentration that you need, or you're actually stealing, which creates a lot of first of all, it's a craving for having something you haven't got in the beginning, and it also creates a lot of tension in the mind, because you have to think about if you get discovered in stealing, or if someone finds out. So actually, if you follow these things, I laughed a little bit about them first time I knew about them, but now I just follow them automatically, because it makes so much sense, because it just makes life easier. And I think it's probably the same with the 10 Commandments at one point in Christianity, that it's kind of to make life easier. But a lot of people, they just laugh at them and say, oh, well, we can fuck around if we want to. Yeah, but it actually makes your life miserable without you knowing it. Yeah, Moritz?
I think what you're talking about with this sort of, if you do these things, it makes life harder. It's sort of like these systems in you that can operate, or that you have sort of given yourself the space to not have them be on like high gear. Like, I think the image of perhaps like sharks in the water is perhaps helpful. Like, you can't expect a shark in the water to just like chill and go away if you drop a steak, like bloody steak, into the water, you know? Like, so if you drop a bloody steak into your body water, in a sense, like by engaging in lots of sex and like doing all these different activities, you rev up the animal in you, like to be active and to run those circuits, do those loops, do those activities, those habits, run that brain circuitry. And then if you go into meditation, you will suck, because you're like completely down here and you're not actually able to still that, because it's something completely out of your control.
Exactly. So it's a way to control your reality by limiting the factors that are actually trying to ruin your meditation or to ruin your life. So it's a simple way of living more easily without too many distractions, basically.
And yet it can be quite instructive actually to do that, and then to try to meditate and then realize how bad it is and how difficult it is, because then it's like it's an actual embodied realization, not an intellectual recognition. Like, I can realize that, yeah, it might be bad if I meditate, if I do all these things, but then I've not actually done it yet. And then if I do it, then I'll realize, fuck, oh, it's actually that way. And what these guys were talking about is actually that, rather than just me like, oh yeah, sure. Like I can deal with that, you know, like, no.
Yeah, that's the direct experience. And that's the only time you'll ever get the experience. They talk about that in Buddhism as well. They have different types of experience. There's learned experience, there's read experience, and then the experience that you hear from someone and you try to take on that experience. But there's no experience like the direct experience. And that's in the insight meditation. That's what you get by scanning your body and starting to figure out these different vibrations, how they affect you. And I had some really interesting things going on for me. I was obviously meditating 10 hours a day, like I was supposed to. And in the beginning, I was like, oh, I'm getting cranky. I'm getting more and more sore on my back, and my legs hurt by sitting so much and all these things. And then the more clear the mind got, and the more of these vibrations that surfaced, and I was able to clear them, the more loose my body got. I wasn't stiff at the end of the retreat. I could sit for 2 hours straight without moving if I wanted to, and I actually ended up one of the last nights on my first retreat not sleeping, because I heard about this yogic sleep technique where you have so much concentration and awareness on your breath and on your body that you'll actually be more relaxed than going into sleep. Obviously, you won't have the REM sleep, but you'll still be really resting your whole body and your mind, and you feel more refreshed when you wake up. And I actually did that, and it was absolutely amazing. And ever since I've been trying to do it. I can't do it because I don't have the amount of concentration or the stillness in the mind to do it. But I woke up after 6-7 hours in bed. I almost didn't move for the whole period of time, and my mind was completely still. I just felt sensations in the body for that amount of time, and just vibrations coming up to the surface and leaving again. Like, I guess it's probably the rising and passing part of the map where we see the true nature of reality manifesting in your body as vibrations coming up and exiting, or arising and passing all the time. And being aware of that for so many hours actually created this circuit of energy. So when I woke up, I had more energy than I ever had in my whole life, and I just felt supercharged. And I hadn't slept in the real sense for the whole night. So it was actually very, very, a very interesting experience.
Cool. I think Dan's got something to say. Go on, Dan.
Hello, Dan. Can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Can now?
Yeah.
Yeah. That mirrors my experience actually of after the retreats, that like on that 9th day that you do become so acutely aware of the energy flows and the sensations, just as you say, passing and coming. And I like there's 2 nights. So there's the night before the last night when you're still in the sanction of silence, and then there's the final night which you're allowed to talk to people. And then on that final night, I found that people, even though you hadn't communicated them, you'd non-verbally just kind of gel and come towards the people who are of kind of like-minded tendencies and sympathies to you. And yeah, it was quite an interesting dynamic to watch the whole room just separate into different groups. But that last night of sleep, the first night of sleep before you were allowed to talk, was exactly how you mentioned. You can't really sleep, and you're half awake, half asleep, but you still wake up with loads of energy. And then the following night's sleep, when you talk to people, all these thoughts just come rushing back into your head, and then you can't sleep through your just sheer mental noise that I found it impossible to cut through. But then the strange thing, as it got dropped off on the train, as you go back into central London, and then you realize that you do have a very high energy state, and you find that animals and children will literally just, I would step onto the tube on the journey home, and it maybe only lasted 24 hours after the retreat, and children and animals would just turn around and look at you straight away. And I had a very similar experience after a very powerful form of magic, even being a kind of fairly mild dose. I walked into a friend of mine's house about an hour or 2 after doing it, and all of his children, who had been misbehaving before and playing up for the parents, just turned around and ran to me. And I had like hyped down to hold 2 children at once, and one child grabbing at my feet. And there is just I have to say the increased energy from the magic was far more transient than the effect of just being still for 10 days and being completely mindful. But yeah,
you worked a lot harder for the first one, probably.
A hell of a lot harder, yeah. God, yes. People, it was quite amusing because you're not allowed to talk to anyone, and I built up at one point, like day 3 or 4, people were just disappearing. Like literally 50% of the people that started just were gone. And then I started talking to myself in my head, thinking, what if this is a cult and people they're actually just executing people and like throwing them over throwing them into a kind of mass grave? and I wouldn't know. I wouldn't be able to tell anyone because I hadn't really spoken to anyone before that we started the precept of silence. So I wouldn't know, and everybody would just know. Oh, they're going off to a meditation retreat, and would their family know? Would they be able to get away with mass murder and filling up the grave? And the guy, one of the leaders, I actually voiced my concern to him. He said, and he had a good sense of humor. I said, where's everyone going? He said, oh, do you not know? We've got a mass burial site around the back of the centre. Literally read my mind. I'm obviously not the first person to have thought that. And then just pissed himself laughing and walked off.
Yeah, it's funny to say,
but
it's a very common thing that a lot of people have, and I had the exact same thing going on for me. I felt trapped, and I felt like, what are they doing to me? But then I started to really think about what was going on, and they couldn't really do anything because they didn't talk to me, they didn't do anything. But I felt like, oh, this is definitely a cult, and I'm trapped here. I'm never gonna get out, and I felt like there was this energetical fence around the whole building. So there's definitely a big subconscious fear about getting trapped or not trusting people that happens in a lot of people's minds, and that will unravel quite quickly within the first, probably within the first 4 days. That happens to most people, and that's also when a lot of people leave, because either they believe that's true, or they just leave because they can't stand these thoughts coming up to the surface and have to deal with that.
And it's funny because you look at everyone else and you go, wow. You then start, wow, he's so still, he's so serene. Like, why am I not? It's like I'm gonna fold. And the weird thing is, all the people that I looked at and go, God, they're such good meditators. Look at them. They're perfectly still throughout the 2 hours. They're not fidgeting, and they were all gone. They literally just did by day 5. There was like 35% of the people left. Even the guy I was sharing the room with, I was like, wow, God, he seemed so diligent and peaceful. And but clearly that wasn't quite the case.
Maybe he got enlightened and he left.
Yeah, maybe he disappeared into another dimension.
It could be.
We're getting close to the full episode, but I want to sort of bring attention to one more thing, which is the term mindfulness itself, because you brought it up, Dan, and I kind of think it's quite tragic that became the term we use in the West, mindfulness, because it's exactly the opposite of what it should be about. Like, your mind should not be full. Of course, mindful is not exactly, doesn't exactly mean that, but it sort of betrays a bit what it's about.
Yeah, but then I think in the same part, again, it's that balance. It's that balance of it's almost like a koan. It's like mindfulness is the mix of your mind being empty and full at the same time, full of awareness and full of connection, but devoid of kind of reasoning and intellect and thought patterning. So I guess I can see both sides of the argument. I think I actually think it's quite a well chosen word, but then you'd probably have to look around it.
Right.
I got one question as well before we wrap up, and that's, I guess, when you're coming out of this Vipassana, I've heard also a lot that people don't want to talk. Like, that talking kind of interrupts maybe that state you're in, or that energy, and everything kind of comes back down to a different sort of level. And that as you gradually obviously get back into the world and start talking again, maybe you lose that peace that you had. So I'm curious what effect you think talking has generally. Like, we obviously use talking a lot to communicate in this culture in the West, but I think a lot of non-verbal communication is sometimes really golden for a sort of a different sort of quality of being. And I really feel like sometimes we over-verbalize and over-talk, and what effect you guys that had on you after 10 days trying to come back into the normal world.
Yeah, I definitely felt it a lot. It feels, I felt it with other experiences as well, especially after Portugal, when we started talking, and how, word and language is an energy, and when you open your mouth and you expel that energy, you're actually removing energy from yourself. And so the more you open your mouth, the more energy you'll be losing. So if you don't have any ways to regain that energy, then you'll feel like you're depleting yourself. And that I definitely feel that very strongly with super intense experiences like Vipassana or something else, like deep ceremonies. Like, as soon as you start talking, it feels like oh, you're taking away something from yourself. And even there's another thing to add on top of that, which is like, when you have these really high spiritual experiences and you try to bring them out into the open, it's like taking an unpolished diamond and showing it to people, because you haven't really worked with it yet, integrated it and polished it and made it shine so you can show it to people and they can actually understand it. You're trying to pull something from the ether and try to verbalize this, which is already really, really hard. And then you're trying to give it to someone who doesn't have a clue what you're talking about. And it's kind of like giving them a piece of shit when you actually have a diamond in your hand. So it can also be very beneficial to just keep your mouth shut about those experiences sometimes until you integrated them.
There's something that Nietzsche said about intellectuals, sort of the talking class, you know, and there's this caricature that I don't know whether he drew it or whether somebody else drew it based on his description, but it's this little person in a sense that has this massive head and like massive mouth and massive ears, and it sort of speaks to this imbalance that we have in the West, so like completely being up here, which is why I talked about the mindfulness term, but it again brings the attention on the mind, also in opposition to the mind actually not being the separate thing at all, but actually part of the body as well. So it's this thing, meditation is not even only about stilling the mind, but to bring, I think, the mind in relationship with the body as well. So.
Yeah, completely. I mean, that's why I think even though transcendental meditation is is quite widely revered. I think currently in a non-grounded kind of fairly yang deficient society, I don't think that it's particularly helpful for a lot of people. I think there are many different types of meditation practices, as there are many different types of breathing practices, and actually it's about refining those that work for you and those that work for you in a particular situation. And if you could learn and take bits from all of those, you would have a repertoire of meditation and breathing practices that would enable you to be more adaptable in various situations and according to kind of how in tune you feel with your body and how it's feeling at that particular time in space and time.
It seems like we're not really running out of steam on this issue. So I think what we can do is take a note of that, and we can perhaps continue the conversation in maybe different direction or different dimension in a sense next time or something like that.
Yeah, I like Dan's idea of like different meditations or different techniques for different circumstances. I think
active
that's
meditation.
Yeah.
Should we take that into the next call then?
Something like that. Yeah.
Let's do that.
Cool. So let's end it here then.
All right. Sounds good.
All right, guys.
Until next time.
Enjoy.
Thank you.
Enjoy your day.
Bye bye.
You too.
Catch you next week.
Bye.